The three riders Mick Doohan, truly despised. The final lap, Eastern Creek. October 1996. Two men wearing the same colors, riding the same bikes, working for the same team, and one of them just put the other on the ground. Mick Doohan climbed back onto his Honda, crossed the line 8th, and did not look back. When the microphone found him, he didn't pause. He didn't search for diplomatic language. He said, "He tried to go around the outside, but I shut the door on him. He left his move too late." That was it. No apology, no pretense of regret. Just a verdict, delivered with the same cold precision he used on the track. What those words revealed wasn't anger. It was something colder. A man cataloging the moment a teammate became an opponent, permanently. To understand what Mick Doohan despised, it helps to understand what Mick Doohan was. He arrived in the 500 cubic centimeter class in 1989 without the American pedigree that had defined the sport's power structure for a decade. No Kenny Roberts lineage. No Californian mystique. Just a Queensland kid on a two-stroke Honda that wanted to kill him every time he opened the throttle past 60%. People who worked around him in those years don't describe him as charismatic. They describe him as untouchable. Not in the way of celebrity, but in the way of a closed door. One engineer who knew both Doohan and his rival Wayne Rainey put it plainly. If you told Rainey he could beat someone, he'd nod and go harder. If you said the same thing to Doohan, he'd look at you with something like contempt. "What? Don't you think I can do it?" He crushed his opposition before he even reached the grid. And he didn't speak to them in the paddock. This wasn't arrogance performing for cameras. This was architecture, a psychological structure built specifically to remove doubt, remove sentiment, and remove mercy from his competitive process. Which is why what happened at Assen in 1992 landed differently than a crash. It landed like an interruption of fate. Doohan had built a 65-point championship lead, not through luck, not through attrition, through dominance so thorough that the title felt less like a race and more like a formality. Then came the Dutch TT qualifying session, a fall, a right leg that would spend the next months threatening amputation. Doctors in Assen wanted to perform a procedure that would have saved the limb structurally, but cost him its function as a racing tool. Doohan refused. He flew home, found other doctors, and fought through weeks of rehabilitation and returned, on a leg that would never fully recover, for the final 2 races of the season. He finished second overall. Wayne Rainey won the championship by 4 points. 4 points. That gap, 4 points stripped by a crash on a Friday morning in the Netherlands, is the wound beneath every rivalry that followed. It did not make Doohan bitter in the way defeat makes most men bitter. It made him ruthless in a different direction. It removed, permanently, any tolerance he had for circumstances beyond his control. And when other riders, through aggression, through politics, or through the audacity of proximity, threatened what he had rebuilt, the response was not measured. It was total. Wayne Rainey never gave Doohan a reason to hate him personally, and that's what made the relationship so much harder to process. Rainey was smooth, cerebral, and relentlessly effective, a Californian who had studied the European circuits with the discipline of an architect. He won 3 consecutive 500 cubic centimeter world championships between 1990 and 1992, and he won them on a Yamaha that was, by most technical assessments, the inferior machine to Doohan's Honda. The gap between them had never been wide enough to be comfortable. In 1991, Doohan finished second in the championship. In 1992, he would have taken the title. The data, the race wins, the sheer rate of his dominance all pointed there, had the Dutch tarmac not intervened. What Doohan felt toward Rainey was not hatred in the tabloid sense. It was something that operates at a lower frequency. Rainey represented the title that should have been Doohan's. Not by luck, not by superior riding, by a Friday morning crash that had nothing to do with either man's ability. And for someone built the way Doohan was built, someone who needed to believe that outcomes were a direct function of will and execution, the 1992 season didn't just cost him a championship. It planted a permanent doubt in the machinery. The world had demonstrated it could take things from him regardless of how he rode. By the time Rainey returned to Europe in 2022 for the Goodwood Festival of Speed, riding a racing motorcycle for the first time in 29 years after the 1993 Italian Grand Prix crash that left him paralyzed from the chest down, Doohan offered his attendance and his words of respect. He and I had a great rivalry, especially 91 and 92. Unfortunately for me, and Wayne came out on top. The word unfortunately carries a weight that a more expressive man might have turned into a paragraph. Doohan put it in one word 30 years later and moved on. Some accounts are never fully closed. They just stop being spoken aloud. What Rainey inadvertently represented to Doohan was a kind of proof that superiority alone is not sufficient protection. The sport could unmake you on a Thursday afternoon and hand your work to someone else. That knowledge did not soften Doohan. It calcified him. Alex Crivillé wore the same Repsol colors. He answered to the same Honda engineers. He occupied the same garage, used the same pit lane, ate in the same paddock. That was precisely the problem. Crivillé arrived at the factory HRC team in 1994, the same year Doohan won his first of 5 consecutive 500 cubic centimeter championships. The Spaniard was fast. Not theoretically fast, not promising fast, but genuinely competitive in conditions where most teammates of dominant champions learn to manage expectations quietly. He took podiums. He challenged for race wins. He pushed Doohan in ways that riders on rival machinery, outgunned by the NSR 500's mechanical advantage, simply could not. And Doohan understood something about Crivillé that the paddock press treated as mere team politics. Proximity is the most dangerous form of competition. A rival from another manufacturer is an enemy across a clear border. A teammate is an enemy with access to your intelligence, your setup data, your tire choices, your engine specifications. Every lap Crivillé ran on the same Honda, he was learning how Doohan made that motorcycle work. Every wet morning test session where Crivillé took notes, he was closing a gap that had nothing to do with natural talent and everything to do with accumulated information. In Jerez, May 1996, this tension reached its most public expression. Crivillé led the race through 26 laps, led it convincingly, led it in front of a Spanish crowd that had waited years to celebrate a home rider in the premier class. On the final lap, spectators breached the barriers, convinced the race was finished a lap early. Crivillé lifted. Doohan did not. By the final corner, the two Honda machines were side by side. Crivillé made an aggressive move to hold his line. The bike threw him. He went down. Doohan won. The Spaniard's team filed a protest, citing the track invasion as grounds to annul the final lap. Honda forced the withdrawal of that protest. The result stood. What followed was not rapprochement. The relationship between the two men deteriorated through the rest of 1996, with the particular tension of colleagues who must share resources while privately keeping score. By the Australian Grand Prix, the season finale, it had detonated. Final lap. Crivillé made a move to the outside. Doohan shut the door. Both crashed. Capirossi won on a Yamaha. Doohan, who'd already secured the championship, gave his version to the media without hesitation or nuance. He left his move too late. Case closed. The subtext was not subtle. The garage may be shared, but the hierarchy was not negotiable. Crivillé would eventually win his own 500 cubic centimeter world championship in 1999. The year Doohan's career ended in that Jerez qualifying crash. There's a particular geometry to that timing. The man Doohan spent years containing stepped into the space Doohan left behind. Whether that reads as succession or irony depends entirely on which man's perspective you occupy. Max Biaggi arrived in the 500 cubic centimeter class in 1998, already carrying the full weight of his own mythology. 3 consecutive 250 cubic centimeter world championships, a fan base in Italy that treated him with the fervor usually reserved for opera tenors, and a public persona carefully constructed around the idea that charm and speed were indistinguishable. He was, by his own implicit presentation, the future arriving to replace what the present had become. Doohan had spent 5 years transforming the premier class into something close to private property. He won 12 of 15 races in 1997. 12. In 1998, with a rookie from Italy, no matter how decorated in the smaller classes, arriving to challenge what Doohan had built, the response was not diplomatic. It was surgical. Biaggi won on his 500 cubic centimeter debut at Suzuka in 1998. He made sure the world noticed. Doohan finished second, the arithmetic of what followed. 8 race wins for Doohan, a disqualification for Biaggi at the Catalan round that effectively ended the championship contest, reads as a straightforward conclusion to a foregone fight. But the psychological register was different. Biaggi had not simply lost a championship. He had failed, in Doohan's estimation, to demonstrate the quality that Doohan respected above all others: consistency under pressure. 6 years after the rivalry, and Doohan still found occasion to assess Biaggi without sentimentality. "I don't know how many times we've seen it before with Biaggi. He can win on a Yamaha and he can win on a Honda, and that's all he can do. He can't string anything together. His consistency's not there." This was not a former rival offering grudging respect. This was a diagnosis. Doohan did not dislike Biaggi because Biaggi had threatened him. He disliked Biaggi because, in his assessment, Biaggi had never been a serious threat, had only worn the costume of one, backed by marketing and media attention that Doohan found, at minimum, unearned. In the world Doohan inhabited, where a 65-point championship lead could vanish on a Thursday and a career could end on a wet Friday qualifying lap. The idea of someone collecting admiration without delivering under pressure was an offense that had nothing to do with the sport and everything to do with it. Biaggi would continue racing after Doohan's retirement, moving into MotoGP's 4-stroke era, accumulating race wins without a Premier Class championship, eventually becoming, in some quarters, a sympathetic figure, the nearly man who arrived when the sport was still someone else's. Whether Doohan ever revised his assessment is unrecorded. It seems unlikely. 3 men, 3 distinct categories of friction. Rainey represented the title stolen by circumstance, the psychological scar beneath the 5 championships that followed. Crivillé represented the danger within the perimeter, the teammate who required constant, active suppression. Biaggi represented something Doohan may have found most irritating of all, the competitor who arrived with theater instead of evidence. What connects them is not simply that they raced against Mick Doohan. Hundreds of riders did that, and most of them exist today as footnotes. What connects them is that each, in his own way, introduced into Doohan's operational world a variable that the Australian had no tolerance for: uncertainty. Rainey made outcomes feel contingent. Crivillé made proximity feel like threat. Biaggi made the metrics of respect feel negotiable. Doohan retired in the spring of 1999, his leg broken again on a wet Friday in Jerez, the same circuit where several of these narratives had found their sharpest edges. He was 33. He had won 54 Grand Prix races. He had ridden 5 years of championship-winning seasons on a machine that required its rider to make 600 micro-corrections per lap, while managing a right leg rebuilt around hardware and necessity. He never made a farewell tour. There was no lap of honor. He announced his retirement, and then he was gone. The sport moved forward with Valentino Rossi and newer machinery and a different grammar of stardom. The 3 riders Doohan had contested with most intensely, one paralyzed, one eventually a champion in Doohan's absence, one a perennial runner-up in a new era. Each carried in different proportions some residue of what it had meant to be in the orbit of a man who treated competition as a zero-sum elimination. None of them were friends of his. That distinction, in Doohan's world, was not an absence. It was the point.